Okay, fine, I'll do it. I didn't want to, but I will. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy that people want to hear my opinion on this show. I mean, people enjoyed my review of the first 2 seasons enough that they wanted more, which, well, that's pretty neat. I really am happy that's the case, it's motivating. But for those of you who are watching this video without having seen my previous Young Justice videos, yeah, I have videos on the first 2 seasons. If you've watched those, you already know an unfortunate truth. I didn't like the second season of Young Justice. I also didn't hate it. I was just ambivalent towards it, mildly frustrated, bored maybe. And when I watch a whole season of something and don't really feel much towards it, normally I just don't watch it anymore. I go, it's not for me, and that's that. So all this is to say that going into this, I didn't care about Young Justice Outsiders. Normally, I wouldn't watch Young Justice Outsiders. Still, as comments piled up, I figured maybe I should try. Despite going into Outsiders with this mentality, I really tried to have an open mind. I don't watch things to dislike them or get bored with them or just rag on them for no reason. I watch them to be entertained or at least learn something new. So I'm going to do my best to give Outsiders a fair shake. I mean, who knows? I might end up really enjoying it, right? Much like Young Justice Invasion, Outsiders begins with a time skip. However, unlike Invasion, Outsiders doesn't skip over crucial information and massive character changes. Instead, most of the characters haven't changed much, if at all. Nightwing set off to work on his own, and he's been doing just that. Artemis is still grieving for Wally, though her emotions aren't quite as raw as they once were. And Miss Martian and Superboy are focusing on their relationship more. However, other things have changed. Now superheroes are hamstrung by politics, and specifically Lex Luthor. As such, a rift has formed between heroes who want to abide by these rules and those who want to break them and help more people. In addition, metahuman trafficking has exploded, with kids, heroes, and villains alike being mind-controlled or kidnapped. Overall, public perception of heroes and superpowered people in general is incredibly low. They're seen as dangerous, uncontrollable people. Considering the events of previous seasons, this is a natural way for the plot to evolve. After all, we've seen heroes get mind-controlled and do horrible things. We've seen villains work together to cause mass destruction and manipulate the public. Isn't it natural that public opinion would fall, that there would be prejudice against metahumans in general? And isn't it also natural that more people would exploit metahumans? Of course, the end result of this is that metahumans aren't exactly fitting into society. Hence, the name. Outsiders. Right away, Outsiders tries to get the audience to care about these problems on a personal level. How do they do that? Well, by shifting focus to some new characters, or at least characters who didn't get much focus before. The first of these is Black Lightning, a hero who accidentally kills a trafficked metahuman child. After this, he rejects his hero life altogether due to his regret and the fact that his powers are no longer working properly. The second is Brion Markov, a prince of Markovia. His sister Tara was kidnapped by metahuman traffickers. When we're introduced to him, he has one desire: to activate his metagene. In doing so, he will be able to be his country's hero and hopefully find his sister too. However, once his powers get activated, metahumans are exiled from his country. Much like metahumans at large, he's left without a place in the world. From there, he has a lot of difficulty finding a new purpose and understanding how he's going to keep living so differently from before. He is, above all else, an outsider. From here, other outsiders are introduced. Forager, a bug from New Genesis who's exiled after trying to make peace between the new gods and his kind. On Earth, he's relatively safe, but he has to hide his form around most people. And even then, he still gets hunted down. Halo, meanwhile, is a kidnapped girl who develops a strange slew of powers. Due to her amnesia and powers, she also doesn't quite know who she is or how she fits into the world. In fact, at the start of the season, she's a lot like a small child, slowly learning how to live at all. Later, Victor Stone is introduced. He struggles to gain his father's attention or affection, and after a horrible accident, becomes half human, half father box. Again, another person who doesn't have a clear place in the world. Another outsider. Meanwhile, Beast Boy is an actor and activist who's raising awareness about metahuman trafficking. Of course, he's also a metahuman, but as the series progresses, he takes on a leadership role. He becomes determined to do more, to become a beacon of hope for metahumans everywhere. Proof that they don't need to hide in the shadows, that they can embrace their abilities and use them for good. However, Nightwing, Artemis, Miss Martian, and Superboy are also still around. Here they take the roles of leaders or mentors. In particular, they deal with training Brion, Halo, and Forager. For everyone, this requires some adjusting, but it's by far the biggest change for Nightwing. After all, at the beginning of this season, Nightwing struck out on his own. Other than Oracle, he's been a lone ranger. However, after a team he puts together for one mission has to bring Brion and Halo home, he has a decision. He can either help them find a place in the world, or he can abandon them and continue doing what he's been doing. In episode 4, with Will Harper's help, he comes to the conclusion that he has a responsibility to these younger metahumans and his old teammates. He needs to help them. He needs to be there for them. As such, he becomes their mentor, taking on a similar role to Red Tornado in Young Justice's first season. The first 13 episodes of the season focus on taking down metahuman trafficking rings and, by extension, finding Brion's sister Tara. Considering how all these characters have motivations and arcs that relate to these ideas, these episodes are thematically coherent. A whole lot of the stuff that happens relates back to these ideas. In concept, this is a great way to write a narrative that has so many moving parts and key characters. After all, without something tying them together, the narrative may get confusing. To Outsider's credit, I rarely, if ever, found these first 13 episodes to be that. But that doesn't mean I enjoyed them. Because Outsiders has a big flaw. Focus. See, despite being thematically focused, Outsider's first half doesn't feel focused. The reason is that the show keeps jumping from character to character, from subplot to subplot, all the while throwing new characters and ideas into the mix. First off, Outsider's first half is setting up the plot for the rest of the season and the rest of the series as a whole. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but the show doesn't have enough time to spend on all this setup. Above all else, the narrative through line of these 13 episodes is this: find Tara. While 13 episodes should be more than enough time to develop this conflict, the writers attempt to juggle the Tara plot along with introducing the VR headset plot along with Granny Goodness, the conflict between Vandal Savage and Darkseid, Victor's problems with his father and his transformation into Cyborg, Beast Boy's work as an actor along with his grief over losing people he loves, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aqualad or now Aquaman, Miss Martian, Robin, Nightwing, and Oracle all manipulating the heroes to get them to work together without knowing it, and I could go on. Anytime I thought the show was finally done introducing new key characters or ideas, sure enough, another one would pop up. Eventually, even if all these plots are related thematically, they became a tangled mess of seemingly directionless ideas, because something gets lost in the mess, and that thing is characterization. Let's start with Black Lightning. As I've already mentioned, he accidentally killed a kid, and now he doesn't want to be a hero. However, he begrudgingly goes along with Nightwing on his mission to take down a metahuman trafficking ring. During that mission, Halo is seemingly killed. Since Black Lightning doesn't know about her regeneration yet, he gets ticked off about watching another kid die. Understandable. He channels that emotion and, unlike this season, focuses. From there, he's able to use his powers again. The problem? He goes back to being a full-fledged superpower-using hero again in episode 4. From there, his arc doesn't progress much, if at all, for the rest of these 13 episodes. Even though, over the course of these first 3 episodes, he was hardly the focus. So sure, his struggle fit in with the overarching plot. It makes sense thematically to focus on this, but I didn't care about him. Frankly, I barely got to know anything about him. The guilt he feels, the responsibility for this death, it's all dealt with so quickly. It feels like someone had a good idea, but then they had another good idea they really liked, so they skimped out on this initial idea and didn't give it the time it needed. Right as I just started to care about Black Lightning's struggle, that struggle was over, only to be replaced by a new struggle, by a new conflict, lost in the shuffle of characters and ideas. In other words, it's half-baked. But the only problem isn't arcs moving too fast. Sometimes it's just the opposite. For example, let's look at what Brion does over the course of these 13 episodes. At the start, he has a clear goal: become a hero by activating his metagene. But then he's kicked out of his country by his brother. From there, he's directionless, watching videos of what's going on back at home. Basically, he isn't living in the now, doing what he can where he is. He's caught up in what could be, in situations he's been removed from. Over and over again, he's told to be patient, which only serves to make him angrier. In episode 6, he even leads Halo and Forager to Infinity Island against the hero's wishes because he thinks he might find some information about Tara there. Once there, they get the crap kicked out of them and Brion realizes he's been foolish and rash. For a little while, he chills out a bit, but ultimately, he still has a short fuse. Over the next few episodes, he falls in love with Halo and grows a little nicer in general. In episode 11, after Brion attacks Nightwing, Nightwing talks to him about how obsessed he's been about Markovia. He convinces him that he needs to calm down and focus on what he can do now. From there, Brion manages to do just that. Finally, in the 13th episode, they go out and find his sister. During that mission, he manages to keep his cool and avoid Simon's psychic powers. On paper, this doesn't sound bad at all. It doesn't even sound like things are happening all that slowly. But here's the problem I have. Every time I started getting invested in Brion's arc, the focus shifted away from him and onto someone else. Eventually the show would come back to him and lo and behold, he'd be complaining about the same things again. How he wants to be back home or how he's not getting enough information about his sister or how he wants to go and just find her already. In reality though, if I really count up the amount of times he complains about that, he didn't even complain that much. However, since focus had moved away from him for so long, going back to find he was still stuck in the same rut, that the same issue was still the focus of his time, got incredibly obnoxious and, ultimately, boring. This way, Outsiders manages to have too much happening with the plot and not enough happening with the characters. Too often, these key components of the story are out of sync. Basically, there are so many forces moving the plot that none of these forces end up being all that developed. I mean, I can describe Brion's struggles to you, I can understand them, I can relate to them and care about them conceptually, and yet, when I'm watching the show, I somehow don't care about them at all. Now, how could the show have handled this better? Well, let's look at what I think is the best episode of these first 13. Episode 7, Evolution. Compared to most of the other episodes here, Evolution is removed from the main plot of Outsiders' first half. Even so, it manages to be a strong individual episode. The episode begins with Vandal Savage's daughter Olympia giving her sister Cassandra a book. In it, Olympia has written the stories she thinks Cassandra should know about Vandal Savage. In these stories, Vandal goes up against a variety of threats over the course of human history. These threats range from bears to small groups of people to armies and alien invasions. Intercut with these stories is the most recent threat against Earth, which Vandal has to take care of himself. The threat this time? An entire armada of aliens is attempting to invade Earth. The heroes don't know, but using the war world, he's saving them all from certain doom. In his own words, he's trying to protect many ignorant humans. As the episode progresses, we learn that he's caught up in a massive conflict with Darkseid, that everything he's done up to this point has been related to that conflict with him. In the end, regardless of all the bad he's done, he's trying to protect the world from this other villain. Yet, he's caught up in a tenuous, temporary alliance with him to protect Earth. After all this though, after seeing how much Olympia adores her father and the stories she tells, and how he's been protecting humanity for so long apparently, Vandal snaps Olympia's neck. What's the reason he has to kill her though? Well, because her mind is deteriorating, and her life can no longer be controlled to serve a greater purpose. It's framed as though Vandal and the people around him view this as a blessing, but for the viewer, it's harder to stomach. He just snapped his daughter's neck while she was mid-sentence. There was no chance for anything to be discussed, for anything to be conclusive between them. He just ended it. This episode works because we're learning more about the plot and more about the characters at a similar pace. Now all of Vandal's actions are recontextualized. We've been shown why he does what he does. We know what the heroes are fighting against, why the light exists. We've learned the nature of the bigger threat in the series and probably the endgame threat. Until this episode, I couldn't have cared less about Vandal Savage, but now that I know his motivations and a bit more about his personality, more about the experiences that have shaped his life and perception, well, now he's interesting. Now he doesn't just matter to the plot. He matters to me. And since I know where he's coming from, I'm curious what he might do next. Overall, I think the first half of Outsiders needed more episodes like this. More episodes where our understanding of the characters progresses along with our understanding of the plot. All too often, the first half of Outsiders treats these two things as separate. As such, both plot and characters feel clunky and disjointed, regardless of the fact that everything sounds related. For example, let's look at episode 12. Up until this moment, Beast Boy has barely had any screen time in this season. And really, he hasn't had much screen time in the show overall. But this episode, he's the star of the show. After using good goggles, he ends up in a psychic trance of sorts. In that trance, he has to grapple with his grief over the deaths that have affected him throughout his life. The deaths of his friends, his mom, the Doom Patrol. At the same time, he figures out that Granny Goodness is involved in this meta-human trafficking. Now, as I've already mentioned many times, meta-human trafficking has been a central focus of the whole season. All these characters have been focusing on figuring out what's going on and how to stop it. And yet, despite all that focus, the one who figures out one of the final pieces of the puzzle is none other than this guy who's hardly been shown in the last 12 episodes of the show. He just pops up. Beyond that, the show has this weird sequence with the Doom Patrol singing, which I guess is supposed to be funny and maybe kind of is, or maybe it's supposed to be disturbing. Either way, the Doom Patrol never showed up until this moment, so this acts as weird exposition combined with character revelation. What I mean is that I've never seen these people before. At the same time I'm learning that he's grieving about them at all, he's figuring out how to deal with that grief and growing past it. In that case, at least for me, it's kind of hard to care. If Beast Boy was going to be so important, why not include him more earlier on? Why not show some of his time with the Doom Patrol? Well, I guess because there are other things to focus on. Because there's Cyborg and Vandal Savage and Raj Al Ghul and Artemis and Harper and all this other stuff. Overall, this arc needed more time. If the writers wanted to include this many key characters, it would have been wise to have a full 26 episodes devoted to it. Then we'd have time to see Beast Boy with the Doom Patrol, to see more of Victor's relationship with his father, to see more creative ways of diving into Brion's anger and frustration. At the core of Outsider's first half, there's something great. There's potential, and there are moments when that potential shone through for me. Some of the banter between Brion, Halo, and Forager really struck for me. I liked that character dynamic when it was there. The problem? It just wasn't there very much. So in my opinion, that potential is squandered by a complete lack of focus, by cardboard characters, by weird misplaced exposition, by a show that ultimately can't decide who it wants to focus on. What I think the show wants to be is this massive, expansive, all-encompassing adaptation of the DC Comics universe, and that's incredibly ambitious. Frankly, I'd love to see what these writers would do with a larger episode count and budget, but that's not what this was. They had 26 episodes, and in the end, they decided to go through this arc in 13 episodes. And instead of cutting things out or focusing, they decided to fly through this material in a flash. In the process, these characters they so badly wanted to include, that many fans I'm sure so badly wanted to see at some point, are mostly half-formed versions of themselves. It kinda sucks, but in the end, I just didn't care about what was happening. But hey, there are still 13 more episodes. Maybe I'll like those more. Or maybe I won't. Either way, I'm already in this deep, so I might as well keep going. See you on the other side for part 2.